So again, we'll have a couple more videos later, and you'll get to sample everything that's been shown on the videos too. All right, so next up for speaking, we have Dr. Jayshree Tailor. Dr. Tailor is a board-certified internist and a fellow of the American College of Physicians. She practices at Progressive Health of Delaware and has a broad range of experience. Today, she's going to present on the link between cancer and diet. So please welcome Dr. Tailor.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for having me be a part of this amazing event. It's so inspirational. The title says Meet the Experts. I don't even want to claim that I'm an expert. What I do want to say is that I've been on a journey for a long time towards healthier and healthier eating, and I would encourage you to do the same. I've been a plant-based eater under the inspiration of my colleagues at work for about 2 years, and my family, who's in the back, can attest that for me it's been rejuvenating my love for medicine to try to encourage my patients towards better health. So the topic that I wanted to talk about today was the link between diet and cancer. So there's 3 objectives that I wanted to talk about. First, I want to define what cancer is and the expected rates of cancer and deaths from cancer. I want to talk about the role that our lifestyle will play in cancer prevention. And finally, I want to specify some foods that are linked to an increase in cancer risk. So this slide shows a little bit about what cancer is. So at the top, you have normal cell division. You've got the green cell right up there, and then it divides into 2, makes 2 more healthy green cells, and then that green cell divides into 2, made 1 healthy cell, and then by chance it made 1 mutated cell. As Dr. Barnard mentioned, our body does have the ability to heal itself, and so in the right circumstances, our body can recognize when there's a mutated cell, and it can commit suicide. It's called apoptosis. And what it does is that it gets rid of itself and no longer can propagate the mutated cell forward. Cancer cells work a little bit differently. There can be a genetic predisposition to developing some of these mutations, and sometimes multiple mutations can happen. And what happens is that you get a loss of the ability to recognize that it's an abnormal cell, and it doesn't kill itself, and it continues to propagate, and that's why you get the abnormal growth of the cells. So for the year of 2019, so we're about halfway through 2019, a little more than that, it's expected that there'll be 1.7 new million cases of cancer in the United States. And I kind of wanted to know, well, what's happening in our state? And in the state of Delaware, they're expecting about almost 6,000 new cases of cancer in the state of Delaware in 2019. Cancer is the second most common cause of death, and it follows heart disease. So this slide is from the American Cancer Society, and I want to show you the estimates of new cancer cases and deaths in 2017. So the top half of the slide shows the number of new cancer cases, and this is for men and this is for women. And on the bottom here you have estimated deaths from cancer for men and women. And as you can see, for men, you have prostate cancer, lung cancer, and colorectal cancer as the most new cases of cancer that happen in men. However, you've got a little bit of a switch here. Men typically will more likely die of their lung cancer than their prostate cancer or colorectal cancer. For women, it's quite similar. You just replace the prostate with another hormonally driven organ, which is the breast cancer, which is breast. So for women, it's breast cancer, lung cancer, and colorectal cancer as far as the number of causes, the new cases of it, and as far as deaths go, it's lung cancer, followed by breast cancer, and then followed by colorectal cancer. So I briefly wanted to talk to you about nature versus nurture. Many times we think of cancer as being caused by bad genes, and scientists have identified some of these cancer-causing genes, and you've probably heard of several of them. Most people have heard of the BRCA gene in some women who have breast cancer, and this is one of the many genes that could be contributing to the role of someone being predisposed to cancer. But science hasn't identified all the genes. We just simply don't know all of them that are out there that can contribute to that. We tend not to realize that even if someone has a bad gene, it doesn't mean that someone will necessarily get that disease. How we choose to nurture our bodies can affect whether or not what we're born with will translate into the development of that disease. So we know, for instance, that smoking predisposes someone to the development of lung cancer. So we nurture our bodies by not smoking. The sun contributes to skin cancer. And so we apply sunscreen to help reduce the risk of skin cancer. And as we'll see, there's some foods that help reduce risk and some foods that help increase risk of cancer. And so we must nourish our bodies with the proper things to help reduce that risk. On this slide, it talks about the number of cancer cases, not the deaths actually, but cancer cases. I just pulled this particular information about the number of cancer cases that's attributable to things that we can control, things that we can modify. And I wanted to focus on things that we're consuming, either eating or drinking, and I wanted to focus on what effect those things can have on our weight and what effect weight has on the risk of cancer. So this is the data is a little bit old. It's the newest data that I found, but excess body weight led to 38,000 cases of cancer in men and 85,000 cases of cancer in women in 2014. And that's independent of any other risk factors that they had. Alcohol intake led to 37,000 cases in men and 50,000 in women. Not eating enough fruits and vegetables contributed to 30,000 cases of cancer overall in 2014. Processed meat intake contributed to 12,000 cases of cancer. And as I said, that's independent of one another, so imagine what can happen when you combine some of these risk factors. Your risk of cancer will increase. So I wanted to focus on the third most common cause of cancer in men and women, which is colorectal cancer. And I just wanted to go back to some anatomy here. This diagram will show you the digestive system, and the green organ down here is surrounding the small intestine. This big green organ is the large intestine. And you've got the proximal, which is the first part of the large intestine on the left side. And then over here you have the distal colon, which is the part that's going down towards the rectum. And then in blue is the rectum. So one of the most underutilized forms of protection that we can have is dietary fiber. And so I was curious to know, what effect does dietary fiber have on the intake of the development of colon cancer? And this is a study, we call it a meta-analysis study. I kind of like these studies because there's nice graphs that can sort of show you one way or the other the trend that things are moving in. And it's a summary of a bunch of individual studies. So the vertical line here tells you whether high fiber intake help reduce the risk of colon cancer in these patients. So that's the vertical line. And then that's the vertical line, and that has to do with the amount of fiber that you've taken. And particularly for distal colon cancer, you can see that a high fiber intake shifted a lot of these numbers to the left. So it actually reduced your risk of colon cancer. And you do have the same effect in proximal colon cancer, it's just more effective in distal colon cancer. And when you look at the numbers, people who took in the smallest amounts of fiber had a 20% higher risk of distal colon cancer than those who took in the highest amounts of fiber. So now that we know that fiber has a pretty big influence on cancer, colon cancer, we have to work to get fiber in our system. And if you Google search Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, fill up on fiber handout, this gives you a nice reference for foods that are high or low in fiber content. Most Americans get only 20 grams of fiber a day. I'm a plant-based eater, and I've been sort of tracking this, and I'm kind of surprised as a plant-based eater that I'm not in the highest range. I'm actually kind of in the middle range. So my goal has been to push that fiber intake even higher and higher. We need to strive to get up to 40 grams a day to help reduce risk of cancer amongst other medical conditions. And if you do this, I would urge you to do it gradually, because what you're doing is you're affecting the change of your gut the microbiome, and if you do it all at once, it can be a little uncomfortable, so you want to just gradually build up your fiber intake. But on the left side, it tells you things like a half a cup of beans has 7 points of fiber. Soy has 1 point of fiber. And if you look at the bottom where you've got your animal products, you've got 0 fiber in there, which will essentially, you'll fill up on the things that don't have the fiber. So in this meta-analysis study, you can see by looking where the data points fell to the right or left of that vertical line that you have an increased risk of colorectal cancer with the consumption of red and processed meat as well as alcohol intake. So the more red and processed meat that you eat and the more alcohol you consume shifts the numbers to the right and increases your colorectal cancer risk. When you break it down into colon cancer versus rectal cancer, you see a similar trend. So again, you see red meat and processed meat increases your risk. I think my little oval's a little bit low. And with alcohol, it stays to the right. Same trend with rectal cancer. So recently, the International Agency of the Research on Cancer and the World Health Organization concluded that there's no question that processed meats can cause cancer, just like we know that sun exposure can cause cancer, and that red meat, like pork, beef, and lamb, probably causes cancer. If you remember on one of the previous slides that I had shown, 20,000 people in 2014 got cancer because of processed and red meat intake. So people often wonder, well, what's in the animal products that's contributing to that? So, there are chemicals that are in the foods. Sometimes the chemicals will come from just the way the foods are processed, and then some of the chemicals that come are created based on the way the food is cooked. And some of these are the N-nitroso compounds. There's heme iron, there's heterocyclic amines, and there's polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. And with some of the reading that I was doing, I was trying to figure out whether or not any of these chemicals were in plants. Some of these chemicals are in plants, and it's because of the way that they're grown and the environment that they're in. So in the soil, it's just there's a higher content of a lot of these chemicals in animal products. So the International Agency for Research on Cancer determined that for each 50 grams of portions of processed meat that's eaten every day, the risk of colorectal cancer increases by 18%. And so to give you a sense of what 50 grams is, it's 2 slices of deli meat or 1 hot dog. And while we may not eat these on a daily basis, when we do eat it, people will throw 3, 4, 5 slices of deli meat on their sandwiches, far exceeding what the 50 grams is like. So a cumulative effect over time can lead to that increased risk. So I want to turn to breast cancer. I sort of broke it down into prevention, and I wanted to think about what's known about preventing breast cancer versus about reducing the risk of getting it again once you've had it or dying from breast cancer. So this slide talks about the impact of alcohol on the risk of breast cancer. I can't overemphasize the findings that there is strong evidence, and I quote, that alcohol consumption is a probable cause of premenopausal breast cancer and a convincing cause of postmenopausal breast cancer, with a 5 to 9% increased risk of 10 grams of ethanol per day. And just like the whole meat thing, I was like, well, what's 10 grams of ethanol? I didn't know what that was. So a standard American drink is considered to be 14 grams of alcohol. So you've already, just with one standard American alcoholic drink, you've already exceeded what the 10 grams that we're talking about. So it's a 12-ounce beer, it's 5 ounces of wine, or it's 1.5 ounces of hard liquor. And when we see patients in the office, I'll screen for alcohol consumption. And I have many patients that'll say, I have a glass of wine with dinner, and then I have one right before I go to bed. And no question, for people that are 65 and older, whether they're men or women, that's exceeding the recommended daily consumption of alcohol. My personal thoughts are, the less you do overall, the better off that you are. So once again, we have a study that shows what the effect of processed meats are on breast cancer. So we already talked about it with colorectal cancer. And what this study shows is they broke these groups down into quartiles. So the people in the lowest quartile consume the least amount of processed meats, and the number of meats that they consumed increased, and they broke these down into different categories of consumption. And with processed meat particularly, the higher processed meat consumption you have, the higher risk of breast cancer you can get. So there's a study that did something interesting. It reduced the consumption of fat by 20% and replaced the consumption of fat with the intake of fruits, vegetables, and whole grains. And this shows what the death of breast cancer, how the death of breast cancer can be reduced when your fat intake is replaced with the whole fruits and vegetables. So these are my favorite graphs, as you can see. You got your vertical line again. And the death after breast cancer diminishes with the consumption of fruits, vegetables, and whole grains. So what about soy? I have many female patients that are about in their 70s or 80s that have had a history of breast cancer, and they tell me that their surgeon or their doctor has said to avoid soy because of the, quote, estrogenic effects of soy. And it's true that soy has something that are like estrogens, like human estrogens, but they're called phytoestrogens. So phyto is a prefix for the word plant. So there are plant-based estrogens, and these come in the form of different chemicals, and one of those chemicals are isoflavones. And you can find these isoflavones in different types of food, and soy is one of them. So on this slide, what I'm trying to show you here is that on the left-hand side, you can actually see that in orange, human estrogen looks a lot like phytoestrogen. So when you've got your estrogen receptors in your body, there's two types of estrogen receptors. There's an alpha receptor and a beta receptor. And human estrogen can bind to both of them and exert certain effects in the body. But when you consume foods that have phytoestrogen, it competes with human estrogen, and it actually diminishes the effect of what the human hormone estrogen can have on certain tissues. So you can actually have a beneficial protective effect with the consumption of soy. When you look at this study called Soy Food Intake After Diagnosis of Breast Cancer and Survival, it suggests that taking more than 10 grams of isoflavones a day reduces the risk of recurrent breast cancer by about 25%. So where do you get these, or 10 milligrams. So where do you get these 10 milligrams of isoflavones from? Well, here's the list. So you can see things like soy protein concentrate has 95%, tempeh 51%, soft tofu 19%, meatless soy sausage about 10%. So these are good sources of isoflavones that can help reduce your risk of recurrent breast cancer. People want to know if soy can reduce the risk of developing breast cancer, and what was interesting is that in the Asian population, it's been shown to reduce risk of developing breast cancer, whereas in the Western population, or in the Caucasian population, that isn't true, and the belief is that Asians actually consume soy at a younger age and for longer periods of time, and that's why they have a beneficial effect, whereas in the Western diet, we really haven't introduced soy early enough or long enough to see that effect. So again, a little bit of an anatomy course. I'm going to shift gears and talk about prostate cancer for men. As you can see, you've got sort of a cross-section of what the human anatomy looks like. And you've got the bladder sitting here right on top of the prostate. And the urethra, which is the tube that allows men to urinate, travels right through the prostate. So when you have an enlarged prostate, that's what is contributing to the inability of men to urinate easily or comfortably. So in 2019, there's a study that revealed that 2% milk intake increased the risk of advanced prostate cancer, and whole milk increased the risk of a later stage of prostate cancer. When we talk about prostate cancer, there's a couple things that we can talk about. We can talk about, under a microscope, how aggressive are the cells. That's called the grade of the prostate cancer, and then the stage of of any type of cancer is whether or not it's spread beyond its organ. So a high grade suggests more aggressive cells. A high stage suggests that the cancer has spread beyond where it originally started from. And some of you may know that the Gleason score tells us how aggressive the cells actually look. So the higher the intake of meat, and especially very well done meat, increases the risk of a higher grade of prostate cancer. And I think that cooking process, when we talk about very well done meat, that cooking process increases some of those chemicals that I was talking about, including the heterocyclic amines, which has the ability to cause mutations that will generate the cancer. This talks about not the grade, but the stage. Advanced prostate cancer can spread with well-done meat and very well-done meat. Interestingly, eggs also had an effect on prostate cancer risk. This chart shows what happens when, on average, even consuming a half an egg or more a day. When that's done, the risk of prostate cancer and fatal prostate cancer actually goes up. I'm going to go to this slide and then go backwards. Dr. Dean Ornish, one of the doctors that Dr. Barnard had mentioned, did a lifestyle study in prostate cancer patients. He put some of his patients on a vegan diet and kept others on a regular diet, and he followed their PSA blood test levels, which can indicate whether or not the cells are propagating or whether the cells are either stabilized or regressing. And when he did this study, this graph will show you that in the control group, the PSA, after 12 months, the PSA levels actually climbed in the control group, whereas in the vegan study, or in the vegan group, the PSA levels actually declined. And interestingly, that translated to 14% of patients in the control group actually needing to go on to have cancer treatment, whereas none of the patients in the vegan group needed treatment for their prostate cancer. This was interesting. They took the blood of men who had prostate cancer that followed a vegan diet, and they took that blood and took it to the lab. And what they did was they exposed lab-raised prostate cancer. So scientists generated some prostate cancer cells. They took the blood of the patients that followed a vegan diet, and what they showed was when they looked at those cells under the microscope, the patients that were eating a vegan diet, those cells did not grow, whereas the patients that were following a regular diet and they looked at those cells under a microscope, the cells actually propagated and grew. So we talked a lot about the effect that certain diets can have on the risk of cancer. This slide talks about results of other studies to see if there was a trend about any cancer incidence, and it was noted that vegetarians had about an 8% less cancer risk, and vegan diets carried about a 15% less cancer incidence overall. Another reason that I want you to be mindful about the foods that you eat is that just weight in and of itself can increase the risk of cancer. Different kinds of cancer. It can increase the risk of bladder cancer, breast cancer, colon cancer, prostate cancer, independent of what effect the food is actually having on that particular cancer. So just being overweight in and of itself, or obese in and of itself, can increase your risk. And excess body fat led to about 130,000 cases of cancer in the United States, or it leads to about 130,000 cases of cancer in the United States every year. So in summary, I just wanted to say that we talked about the definition of cancer, it being the second most common cause of death. We talked about how nature gives us our DNA, but how we live can dictate whether or not the genes that we have will be promoted on to developing cancer or not. Colorectal cancer is influenced by fiber intake, processed meat, and red meat. Breast cancer is definitely linked to alcohol consumption and processed meat, but that soy can be an ally to breast cancer survivors. And prostate cancer risk can be reduced if one eliminates dairy and eggs. And I just wanted to end this. I found this on the web. If you change nothing, nothing will change. And so I want to ask you, what dietary change can you make to reduce your risk of cancer?